Hello, everybody, and welcome to the IzzyVerse. I'm really excited for this episode here today. I'm going to be talking with creator Jim Valentino about all his work, his history, and some of the work that he's done and some of the work he's currently working on. But before we do that, I just want to give some plugs for a couple of things that are going on very shortly. So this Monday, starting this Monday, I'm going to have my interview with Sean Hill. We did a recording not so long ago. We're going to be talking about Tokyo Bronx. So that's going to be fun. It's actually a really good interview we had. We talked about a lot of things. We even went into a little bit of tangents here and there, but it was a very good interview with Sean Hill. Also, in case you're wondering, we still have the best of Batman movies of all time. My list is up, and you can see them on the streams everywhere you watch the show. It's also on the YouTube channel. I believe I put it on Instagram as well. So go check that out. If you need a place to get comic books, Squiggy's Dugout's the place to get your comic books if you are in New Rochelle. It's a great place. Go check it out. Ask for Peter. He's the guy that's usually there, and he will hook you up with some good books. So that's fun. So without further ado, let me introduce to you all. I gotta read this. American writer, penciler, editor, publisher of comics, best known for his work in Guardians of the Galaxy for Marvel Comics. He did some What If, and co-founder of imagecomics, a creator-owned publisher. You probably have heard of it, and some great books there. He's also done, books like Shadowhawk, the semi-autobiography, Touch of Silver, The Pack. And now he's done this book that I'm going to show you right now, the official Image Timeline. Let me introduce to you guys, without further ado, Mr. Jim Valentino. Hey, Jim, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. Whoa. I'm so pumped up for this episode because there was a lot of stuff I wanted to talk to you about. But thank you for making the show. And again, it's an honor and privilege to meet you and to talk to you and to have you in this show. So
it's nice to be here. Thank you.
All right. So let's get started with the beginning, because I like always talking about the beginning. Talk to me a little bit about what do you love about comic books, your art, and things of that nature. And you could go as long as you want, you could go as short as you want.
What do I love about comics? Everything. I mean, just everything. I started reading comics when I was about 2. I started drawing, and my father realized that I was drawing in a comic booky style. And he read comics during World War II, his favorites being Captain America, the Justice Society, Superman, and Submariner, who he always called Submariner.
That's about right, too.
Yeah, he said he loved Captain America because Captain America hated the Nazis, and he loved the Submariner because he hated everybody. And yeah. So, for me, comics was like what people describe as a religious experience. It was just a bolt from the blue. I got them immediately, and it was just a lifelong love.
You mentioned Captain America and Submariner, or Submariner, as we'll call them here today. What were your books growing up? What did you like reading growing up?
Oh, those. Let me see, because I grew up in I was born in 1952, so I was just in time for the DC Silver Age and for the beginnings of Marvel. So all those books in that era I just loved. And anything and everything by Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Kurt Swan, just a whole, name them, and I loved all those books.
Yeah, that's some of the things that I always like asking people, because it's one of those, especially you were able to grow up in an era where the Silver Age was blossoming. It was just forming, right? You had a lot of books like Flash and Green Lantern come out. Silver Age Flash, Silver Age Green Lantern.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could live that experience just to see how it was reading those books. Obviously, I grew up in a very important age as well in comic books, because I started collecting comic books in 87. And in 87 was really the start of the artist boom, as we'll call it, right? Um, not my first book. My first book was a John Byrne reprint of Spider-Man. It was Marvel Tales, so I'm sure you remember Marvel Tales.
Oh,
And
sure.
it was the living Monolith was in the cover with Thor and Spider-Man, right? I got it because of Spider-Man, but it was the living Monolith. Monolith. You see how I told you about my enunciation is terrible. But it was them, Thor. The story was written by Chris Claremont. I remember that. And it was John Byrne. And it was a reprint of a Marvel team-up book.
Right.
That was my first book. I still own that book to this day. It looks like garbage. Do not put it to CGC standards, because it will be given a point 2, right?
Yeah.
And I did anything a kid would do with a comic book at that time, even though I was a lot older. I was about 11 at that time, but that's when I really got serious in collecting books.
Right.
But my second book was someone pretty well, I'm sure, by a guy named Todd.
Oh, Todd. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, I remember him.
You remember that guy, right?
Yeah.
And it's my second book, and it's a cover of another guy with two guys that are in this cover, and one of them happens to have claws that are showing the other character.
Oh.
Yep. So it's that famous cover of Wolverine and the Incredible Hulk. That was my second book, and I was sold. That's it. It was it. I was a diehard fan moving forward. Loved it ever since. I was collecting those books. Obviously, I got into X Factor, X-Men. Everybody was into X-Men at that time.
Sure. Yeah.
Everyone loved X-Men at that time. But what was really great about that era, in that particular moment, was the fact that you had artists like yourself that were being risk takers in their style. McFarlane being one of them, Mark Silvestri being another one, Rob Liefeld being another one too. People critique his work, but when X-Force and New Mutants came out, everybody loved it and ate it up, right? They all had their flaws, but at the same time, they knew how to make up for it. And one of the things I remember going to a signing by McFarlane, is McFarlane said is like, hide your flaws. If you're good here, then do something here to cover it. And and that was something that I always listened when people said it. And there was also your books that I absolutely ate up.
You're the one.
I'm the guy. I have your entire Guardians of the Galaxy run. I had it. And I love everything about it because it was so different and so fresh. But let's talk a little bit about Guardians of the Galaxy and your version of Guardians of the Galaxy, because it really isn't the movie version of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
No.
It's the OG, as we call them now, the OG Guardians of the Galaxy. And talk to me a little bit about them. And
well, what do you want to know?
Well, first of all, how you got involved in doing Guardians of the Galaxy, because I did hear stories about how you got involved in doing this particular book. And the one story, I think it was Mark Gruwald that told you to tell me everything about how all these characters in the 31st century and what that.
Yeah, that was after the pitch was accepted. Rob and I were going up to Oakland to a convention, and I think he was still working on Hawk and Dove at the time. And I had done a couple of what ifs, I think, at that point, and maybe a couple fill-ins here and there. But I was looking for a steady gig, right? Mm-hmm. And so I prepared a bunch of proposals. One of which was called Young Avengers, that I was going to write and Rob was going to draw. Mm-hmm. But I just felt like there was something missing. I needed another one just to put me over the top. So I was looking through the Marvel Universe handbook, and my thought was, go for a character that no one else is doing and come up with something fresh for that particular character. So I'm looking through the Marvel Universe handbook, and I come across the Guardians of the Galaxy. And so I call up Rob and I said, what do you think of Guardians of the Galaxy? He goes, they look cool, but they don't have a story.
That is true.
And at that point, they had done their initial run, and then there was that secondary run by Al Milgrom. And nothing against Al Milgrom by any means, but after they defeated the Badoon, it just kind of seemed like they were floundering. So I went to a midnight run to the bathroom that night, I think, and it hit me. Why not do an exploration of the Marvel Universe 1,000 years in the future, which is when those Guardians existed. And I pitched it to Tom DeFalco, excuse me, and Tom was thinking about the Guardians, and he wanted to do a story based 500 years in their future, so the 35th century, right? And his idea was an expansive galactic type group, all right? Kind of like the Green Lantern Corps if it were the Legion of Superheroes. Mm-hmm. That's what I said to Tom. Tom kind of laughed and said, yeah, that's kind of it, a galaxy-wide group, but they're all different from one another. They're not like the Green Lantern Corps where everybody's the same, just aliens. These guys are all different. So I said to him, if you let me do this book, if you guys accept the pitch, I'll set that up for you where you can do a series set there in the 35th century, which I did in issue number 8. Martin X muses about a large galaxy-wide group, which I think he called the Galactic Guardians, and that's where that name came from. Mm-hmm. So they accepted the pitch pretty quickly, and then Grunwald said he wanted me to write down where every character in the Marvel Universe would be in 1,000 years. And I thought he was busting my chops, But as it turns out, he was right. Mark Grunwald was a very smart guy. Mm-hmm. And what it did was it informed me of who I could use and who I couldn't use. And that in turn showed me how I could use certain things versus how not. You have to remember, and this is something that I thought, is that Robin Hood was 1,000 years in our past, right? We still know the name, we don't know if he actually existed, but we know the name. It has survived 1,000 years, but all the, a whole bunch of other people who were alive at that same time hasn't. And that was kind of important, so there's a lot of people that I just removed, like Spider-Man, for a good example. Popular character in the 20th century, but would he be remembered 1,000 years in the future? Probably not. But Thor, he would be. Galactus would be, and so on, as you go down the list.
Yeah, so one thing I loved about that particular run was the fact that you were using, current characters, but set in a future landscape, right? So
right.
Just to show some of that artwork, because I do have it here. I was going to go a little ahead, but let's add this to the screen. Okay. So this is some of the issues here. Obviously, one is issue number 1, and then the other one is part of the traded paperback of the different characters. Obviously, we see Yondu here. I do remember when they put Yondu in the movie, and I do remember I was like, oh man, I missed the mohawk. There was I loved the mohawk, even though it was like this. It was still there, but it wasn't like really there. And very very different from the version. I heard that you weren't too crazy about Yondu in the movie.
Yeah.
But how did it feel when you saw the second movie and you saw a lot of these characters actually come to life?
Well, on the one hand, it's it's interesting, but I think well, they did a whole bit with Taserface,
Oh yeah, Taserface was great.
and my son created Taserface when he was 5. So yeah, I knew it was a really stupid name, but my son got a big thrill out of it.
But it's such a comic book name, though, when you really think about it, right? The names that we would come up with in comics, especially.
He was only called that in the first issue, and
Mhm.
then he lost his name, and then when he came back, he was Overkill. But that covered the dark Shadowhawk or the dark Starhawk cover.
Mhm.
When I did that storyline, I wanted to change his name to Shadowhawk. And Tom DeFalco said, no. We want to keep the name Starhawk. Why don't you make a new character called Shadowhawk?
Mhm.
Okay. So,
And thus Shadowhawk was born.
yeah.
So there's another ones. There's some other issues. Obviously, here's the Guardians as we know it from your run.
Right. Right. And Yondu's crest is not a mohawk. It's actually a crest. Think of it like more like antlers or a rhinoceros horn. It's actually hairs that are mooshed together,
Mhm.
because Yondu's race are marsupials.
Mhm.
So their women have pouches for their babies, like marsupials do. And he wasn't very specific about what the crest is for, but the inference was that it was for mating. Although I don't know how. So, didn't go that deep into it.
Yeah. We'll talk about these guys a little later. I wanted to get
Those
to.
bums. Somebody should have called the cops.
There are some books here. I had it in a certain order. Now I lost the order.
Okay.
Where is it?
Just
I
go.
lost the order. Darn it.
Just go
There's
random.
Yeah, there was a book I wanted to go over, a Guardians book that I fell in love with. There was two. It was The Return of the Silver Surfer and Galactus. First
Yeah.
of all, the Galactus issue 25 book. When that book came out, it was amazing. It was obviously during the time of the die cut era where everything was a special book, and what we call variants today, right? That time. But that was one of the best books, best covers I've ever seen done in that way. Um, Talk to me a little bit about that story. That Silver Surfer Galactus story in particular, because it was amazing. That particular story, just looking Silver Surfer coming back with the gown.
Yeah. The most requested character during my run of Guardians was Silver Surfer, like right from issue 1. When are you going to do the Silver Surfer? When are you going to do the Silver Surfer? We had set up Galactus in the first annual, right? That was Galactus's first appearance in my Guardians. And then I just thought issue 25, right around there, would be the perfect time for Galactus and the Silver Surfer. So I moved everything towards that, knowing that the Silver Surfer was going to come in issue 24. And we had actually mentioned him as the keeper in, I think, issue number 8. So we had set it all up, for him to show up eventually. So he came in issue 24, which was, the cover was inked by Ron Lim, who did the Silver Surfer. I tried to get the cover inkers to kind of match the character. And then issue 25, which was a double issue, we brought in Galactus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when I saw that cover of the Silver Surfer, it did look very much like a Rob Lim drawing. But now that you mentioned the inking, it was like, oh yeah, now it makes sense. Something that he still does today. To this day, you still see Rob Lim drawing characters like the Silver Surfer, which is amazing. I always loved the Silver Surfer in particular.
Yeah.
It was always great seeing that Silver Surfer. Let's go into some earlier stuff, right? I want to talk about Normal Man.
Okay.
When I was doing some research and I was looking up characters that you did before Marvel, um, you were the indie guy in the world in the Image group. For what
Yes.
I saw, you were the guy, and not just the indie guy. You were predominantly the one guy that actually wrote books consistently. Not to say that McFarlane didn't write books because he did Spider-Man, Larson did Spider-Man for a little bit, but you had a long run in writing books. But before we even talk about them, I want to hear the concept behind Normal Man, especially with a name like Normal Man.
Okay, it came from a couple different places. A friend of mine, David Clark, had told me a couple years before this that he had a story notion called Tales of the Innocent Bystander. And his idea was that these would be stories about a guy who was always in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was never the reason that things went wrong. He was just a bystander, and he was always there at the wrong time. So that kind of stuck in the back of my head. I had done a story in the back of Cerebus issue 50, about the death of John Lennon, the murder of John Lennon. And Denny Lubert, who was Dave Sims' wife at the time, called up and said, if you think about doing something, think about doing something with us. I went, okay, yay, great. This was a big break. Cerebus was very popular at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But she warned me that Dave was concerned about my more underground work, and he was afraid that I was going to get them in trouble. So I said, okay, I'll keep that in the back of my head as well. So I was looking for something kind of innocuous. And I was living in a part of San Diego called Normal Heights, hence the name. So I talked with Dave Clark, and I told him my concept for Normal Man, which is essentially Superman in reverse, where Superman comes to a planet where he's the only guy with superpowers. Normal Man goes to a planet where he's the only guy who doesn't have superpowers. So in my larger concept of Normal Man, even ants had superpowers. It's like everything on the planet had superpowers. Except Normal Man. So I asked Dave if it was okay if I used the basis of his concept, which I'd changed considerably. And he said, sure, he wasn't going to use it. And there you go. So I pitched it to Denny in San Diego. It must have been 83. Mm-hmm. And as things would have it, I had done... the first thing I showed her was a spoof of The Rocketeer, the Pacific Presents #2 cover of The Rocketeer. And Dave was standing there. Dave Stevens was standing there when I showed it to her, and Dave busted out laughing. And then he said, well, if you can impress Dave Stevens, then we're going to do this. So it turned out to be Aardvark Vanaheim's very first color book. And, it was a small, modest success. It did okay.
Yeah. I love his suit, his attire in particular. What was the idea behind that attire with the orange pant? Obviously the colors are a big part of it, but just the attire by itself, it just stands out. It's very clownish, I would say, in a way, but it looks great, especially in next to the other two characters. I know Captain Erickson because his name is right there on his chest. I don't know who the other character.
Yeah, that his name's on the chest, so he doesn't forget it. Actually, his guy. I don't remember what I was thinking with Normal Man's costume. I think it was based on Jimmy Olsen.
Okay, I could see that.
everything. And the green suit. So yeah, I think it was Jimmy Olsen. Captain Everything, his costume, if you look at it, it's Mighty Mouse's costume.
Yes, it is.
And I remember Mighty Mouse having his name across the chest. So I thought, well, that's just great. That's funny. Just in and of itself, it's funny.
Yeah, it really is. And and that chin in particular is amazing. But
Yeah.
it does have when I saw it, I was like, oh, I definitely need to talk a little bit about this book because it just
It was fun.
have you ever did a revival of Normal Man any time? Because obviously I don't see it.
Yeah, I did an issue. I did a 20th anniversary issue many years ago. I can't remember. He appeared in Epic Light at Marvel, a book that Fabian Nasieza was editing. We did Normal Man, Megaton Man special.
Yes, I did see that one.
Yeah, we teamed the two of them up with the Flaming Carrot and Mr. Spook from Bean World. So that was fun. So yeah, it a couple of times. Yeah.
Let's move on to now you're at Marvel, and I see the What If books. What If is a personal favorite. I always love What If.
Me too.
What If because again, it gives you one thing I noticed about your run in Marvel is that you were given books that also gave you the ability to do whatever you really wanted to do with it.
Right. The Guardians of the Galaxy, when I was doing it, and the way I approached it was an ongoing what if, because it didn't affect the continuity that was going on in the 20th century. It was just a what if, an alternate universe. So I had a lot of free. They only told me twice that I couldn't do something. That was it. But yeah, the what if, the Amazing Spider-Man ones I did were probably my least favorite of the 10 or so that I did. The Fantastic Four one, that came from a letter writer in the What If magazine who said the title, "What if the Fantastic Four all had the same power?" And the way I figured of doing it was doing each chapter with them with a different superpower and a different outcome for them. And each chapter was inked by a different inker because we were looking for an inker for Guardians of the Galaxy. And I chose one guy, my editor chose another guy, and of course he won because he was the editor. So there you go. But I think our favorite was What If number 7, which I wrote and laid out, and it was based on an idea and drawn, penciled by Rob Liefeld. And Craig, the editor of What If, was coming to visit my studio. And Rob and I off and on shared studio space. And when we didn't share a studio, we were almost always in one or the other's studio, hanging out together. So Rob told me he had this idea for What If, and he told it to me, and I said, "You have got to tell that to Craig." So Craig comes in and into the studio, and Rob's there, and I said, "Hey, Rob's got a great idea for a What If." Craig goes, "What?" And Rob says, "What if Wolverine was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? And Craig's eyes just bugged out. And he went, "Do it." And that was it.
Yeah. I picked the Amazing Spider-Man one because first of all, the story is what if Amazing Spider-Man had not married Mary Jane. And it took me right back to the One More Day storyline.
Yeah.
And it's what if is like it's like a precursor to stories that we're gonna see 20 years later. That's how I feel when I read a What If book. Like it's to the point that we'll get to that story somewhere in the actual continuity, as we call it, even though the continuity is all jacked up these days, because we have so much of it, right?
Yeah.
But when I saw it, I just immediately thought of that, and that's why I picked it, because it's like, oh, you guys thought of the idea long beforehand.
my favorite memory of that cover was that's not me on the cover. It's I think John Romita Sr. But I had drawn a version of that cover, and Mr. Romita called me up and said that he wanted to do a correction, an overlay of it. And he said, "I hope you don't mind." I was like, I said, "Mr. Romita, if you want to give me a drawing lesson anytime, yes, please." You know, and he sent it to me, and I had it for the longest time, but it got lost in some move or something. I wish I still had it, or maybe it's buried somewhere that I don't know where. But he literally did an overlay of it, which, to me, it's like, boy, if you're going to get a drawing lesson, you may as well get one from John Romita.
Yeah, absolutely right. I saw his work with not McFarlane, his work with Stan Lee, the video that they did today, how to draw the Marvel way. And you could just see, oh man, look at how awesome this is. The quality of the video is terrible because obviously the old school VHS, but it's like you're watching this and it's like I was in a museum that we have, Society of Illustrators, which they're heavy on comic book art and just keeping history of comic books alive. And it was a Spider-Man exhibit, and they had a little, a little viewing room of how to draw the Marvel way, and just seeing Stan be like, how do you do this? How, just being like a kid talking, and that was just the way Stan was for everything I've seen of Stan, and it's just hearing Romita. I could just see Romita get angry like a parent in front of somebody because of the way he spoke with such authority, and it was just so powerful. And
he's a very nice man.
Nothing saying that he's not, but it was just the way it's like, listen, son, I'm just gonna draw this image. That's all I'm thinking in my head he's gonna say.
When he told me that he was doing the overlay, he was apologetic. I was like, man, sign it, please. Send it to me, sign it, please.
Yeah.
It's like when one of your heroes does something like that. I remember when the Daredevil movie, the Ben Affleck movie came out, and I was at some small convention in Pasadena, and John Romita came walking up with his wife and with his son, John Jr., and introduced me to his wife, and I was like blown away that he knew who I was. Just completely knocked off my socks that he knew who I was. So, when one of your heroes acknowledges you, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I will admit to that. I've been there too. I can't tell you who, but I've been there where, guys like one person I'll say will be Jim Lee in particular. Not that he knew me by name, but he knew my wife. Because years ago, my wife and we would go to conventions, and in this particular convention, my wife was pregnant of our first child, and he sees her, and he offers his seat. He says, "Would you like to sit?" And of course, my wife is like, "Yeah," and I'm geeking out and stuff like that, and I'm like, and he did a sketch for us and things like that, and then like a few years later, how's everything? What did you have? And it was like he just remembered that, and I was like, cool. Jim Lee remembered who I am, and little things like that little things like that was so awesome. Just things you remember from going to a show, because I've been in so many shows. I can't even tell you how many shows I've been to in my time.
Me either.
Yeah, I really can't. One thing I can say is I've been to every New York Comic Con that I've been. Being a New Yorker, it's there. I get to that point now where I go to it, and it's like it's almost as if you've seen it all, but there's always something there that you didn't see before, and that's what I love about the show. So it's always great. Let's move on, because we talked a little bit about the Guardians, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the characters. We mentioned Silver Surfer. We mentioned also Galactus, but you also had a hand to doing different takes on characters. One of them in particular, which now we're starting to see a different version of what you did with Cosmic Ghost Rider, and you were able to do Ghost Rider with Spirit of Vengeance. Talk to me a little bit about why Ghost Rider, out of all of the characters that you wanted to do it.
Well, Ghost Rider was real popular at the time, So, it was a nice tie-in, for it. And I was doing this story. I was building up to the Universal Church of Truth,
Mhm.
right? And this was a planet that, as I recall, I mean, it's been a long time, but as I recall, was taken over or about to be taken over. And Ghost Rider, the demon was not. It wasn't any one individual, as I recall. So I thought, well, why couldn't it still be around? And I think I was thinking of, there was an old Star Trek where they had Jack the Ripper was a inferior being that took over other people's bodies. So I think I was thinking along those lines and figured, why not? We could do that. So that's where it came from.
Yeah. You also did like the League of Punishers, is that correct? Because I saw an image of a whole bunch of Punishers, and I know it was your art.
They were a street gang, which someone at Marvel gave me some crap for. But the notion was, it had been established for a long time, I think during Al Milgram's run, that Vance Astro had recorded what basically would be discs about the first heroic age, which he was a kid through. He idolized Captain America and knew all that stuff. So I looked at that and thought, it's kind of like a book series, what we would consider a book series now. So he had all these discs or tapes or whatever the heck it was, in that timeline about the heroic age of, what would be 1,000 years ago. And it occurred to me that the Punisher, being the Punisher, could be the perfect inspiration for a violent street gang. The Punisher is a character I never liked. So making it about the Punishers, and the Punishers had terrorized basically New York. That was my first story arc when the Guardians came back to Earth.
Yeah. All right. Let's go on, because now we're talking about the defection. With now we could show the picture of those guys. All right, the popular photo. I've seen this photo so many times.
Yeah.
So many Wizard magazines I've seen this photo in. Where was this photo taken, if you could remember, and what was that experience like as a whole, looking back 30 years now?
It was taken at Mark Silvestri's cottage, which was on the beach at Malibu. Down below where the two guys sitting are, Hank Canals and Jim Lee. A lot of people think, Hank must be Wills. No, he's Hank. Completely different person. He was the scripter of Youngblood #1. How is it being in the same room with these guys? It was interesting. We set down a couple of rules that I think were very wise of us to do. And, it was, there was a lot of, some of us knew each other better than others. Obviously, I knew Rob better than I knew almost anybody in the room. Rob knew Todd, and he knew Eric probably better than anyone. So, there was some back and forth. Jim and Mark had known each other because they worked together in the X-Men office. So, it was interesting. It was a very interesting thing to be a part of, and a very cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah, because I've heard the stories. Obviously, when we talk about the superstar guys, right? Todd, Rob, and Jim. Those were the guys that were like the big three of the bunch. And then, but then you got Eric Larson and Mark Silvestri and yourself. I'll include you into the mix. you guys were like right on their tails as far as the talent goes. Book selling wise, all of you have talent, and I do believe that you're all great. um but in reality, it's like you pretty much took Marvel and just said, we're out.
Yeah.
And you left Marvel in a very weird place for us watching as a fan, because again, as I said, I grew up with the comics as early as 87. So I saw all this unfolding, right? I'm hearing about Malibu Comics taking over. I'm hearing about this guy leaving. I'm hearing about that guy leaving. Obviously, Todd McFarlane retiring. But it was at the exact same time where we got X-Men #1, Spider-Man #1, X-Force, and all these guys are just saying, we're leaving and we're doing our own thing, which I want to say happened before and it happened after, but nothing to this extent, where a large group of extremely talented, in fact, the top guys, the top booksellers, are leaving your company to go form their own company. The closest comparison I could give it to is to wrestling. And if you probably noticed that I'm into wrestling, but when guys like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man defected WWE, and then some other guys, that's the closest thing I could think of when I think about it. I know for you, it was a very scary experience because of where you were. Not to say that you were in financial debt, but pretty much you just weren't making the millions as they were. So
Right. I have a large family.
yeah, and you have the family, you have everything. You just said it. Rob was in his early 20s,
Yeah.
and
He
he was a kid. Like, that's the kind of stuff teenagers do all the time, right? That's the kind of stuff when I'm 20, I would do it. Today, I'm in my 40s. I wouldn't dare do something like that. Because I know what I have, what I have to give up for. What was it like, the nights talking to your family and making this decision happen? And then what was the moment that actually made you say, okay, I'm down, let's do this?
Well, I go through it in the book, how it started. But Rob
Yeah,
basically,
I was seeing it too. I was reading it.
Rob basically talked to the three people that he knew the best and trusted the most in the industry, and that was Todd, who was retired at the time, Eric, and myself, who was an on again, off again studio mate. Eric signed on immediately, much to his credit. He was like, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it." Todd vacillated, and for me, it was a scary proposition. I was the oldest person in that group, and oddly enough, I still am the oldest person in that. Who knows how these things work? Anyways, I wasn't on a million selling book. I wasn't a millionaire. I had 5 children. I had a mortgage. All this stuff. It was kind of scary. So Todd and Rob were heading to New York for the first Sotheby's comic auction, the first Sotheby's Comics art auction, where I believe that they auctioned off X-Force #1, X-Men #1, and Spider-Man #1. Okay, which is why they went. So Todd calls me up and says, "I got Eric Larson in one of my back pockets, and I want Jimmy Valentino in the other." And I said, "Are you in?" Because he'd been vacillating all summer long. He goes, "Yeah, you're not going to leave us in the lurch, because if I do this and this doesn't happen, I'm screwed. That's it for me." And Rob assured me he was in, and I said, "Okay, I'm in." So then I had to go home and tell my wife.
Yeah, that's not a fun experience, because I got a wife too, so I know that feeling of having
So
that conversation.
what I said to her was, I just made the smartest move I ever made, or the worst mistake I've ever made. And I don't know which it is. So what did you do this time? And So I told her, and she just said, I think it's a good move. I think it's the right move. So what happened was Rob and Todd went to New York, and they ran into Mark Silvestri at the hotel, told him what they were doing, and Mark was like, yeah, I'm in immediately, much to his credit. They told Jim. Jim vacillated. He wasn't real sure. But Todd, being Todd, I guess, pulled Jim by the collar into the meeting with Terry Stewart the next day. Jim had no idea what was going on or what he was in for. And I think, knowing Jim, when Todd started in, he was like, oh, God.
It almost sounds like an intervention or something.
Yeah. It's like, who let this guy out of the loony bin? And Rob called me that day, and he said, the first phone call, he said, we got Mark Silvestri. And I went, wow, he's great. He is really great. That's cool.
At that time, he was so underrated too, I think. At that particular time, his work in X-Men is amazing, and Wolverine as well.
It's a great artist. I mean, we took a vote between us, and Mark Silvestri, we all consider to be the best artist of the original Image people. That's how good he is. I mean, he really is that good. So then he calls me up the next day, and he said, we just got Jim Lee. And my jaw hit the ground. So I called up. There were two people that I was talking to all summer and telling them about what was going on. One of them was Eric Stevenson, and the other one was Larry Marder. And I called up Larry, and I said, you remember that avalanche we've been talking about all summer? He goes, yeah. I said, I think it just became an atomic bomb. And he goes, why? And I said, they just signed on Jim Lee. And there was dead silence on the other end of the phone. And Larry said, you guys are going to do so much damage. And I was like, yeah, cool.
Yeah. Again, watching it unfold the way it unfolded, it was just like, this guy's going, that guy's going. And it really was a domino effect of one guy was going here, one guy was going there. Like, I think I heard of Rob first as the first guy.
Oh, no.
But I'm saying when I heard it, that's the first name I heard, because I saw the poster. I saw, Youngblood executioner.
That was before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The press release said Rob, Todd, Eric, and me. And Jim and Mark did not want to be in on the press release. I think they were still kind of hedging their bets. They weren't sure. So that was the press release, and then we announced some of the people that we were talking to at the time. Jerry Ordway, I think George Perez was part of that initial thing. I can't remember. I think it's in the timeline book.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to say was, I wanted to ask you, because I know how. I've heard stories about how Todd felt, how Rob felt. How did you feel in being in Marvel? Because it didn't look like, because again, you were given books that you were allowed to like flourish in your abilities, but they were, like with Todd always talked about how people, why are you complaining about Spider-Man's webbing, right? People like it. The book's selling. What's the problem? But in your case, you were given a lot of freedom, because you were given books that you really didn't have to worry whether or not they were going to say yes or nay to it, because it's not going to affect the timeline, as you just mentioned, right? It's not going to affect the continuity. It's in a different pocket universe and things like that. So were you happy at Marvel at that time, or were you just like the rest of the guys where you were like, I don't know, or you just wanted to be part of something big in that sense?
Okay, there's a misperception here, so let me clear things up for you. We were all glad to be at Marvel, including Todd. Everybody was glad to be at Marvel. Marvel was number one. Marvel was, if you're an artist, if you're a comic book guy, Marvel was your dream place. It's like, really? I get to go and play in that sandbox? Great. So, so that's number one. Todd got tired of all the people telling him, no, you can't do that, and wanted to strike out on his own. Todd was the most anti-Marvel and kind of painted all the rest of us with that brush. But none of us, if you look back, none of us said anything bad about Marvel at all, only Todd. And, what we couldn't get people to understand is that the rest of us were not Todd. Todd was Todd, but the rest of us were completely different individuals. For me, yeah, you're right. They did leave me alone. Like I said, there were only 2 times that I was told no. One of them we already talked about, when I wanted to change Starhawk's name to Shadowhawk. They told me no. The other one was I wanted to introduce a 1,000-year-old Wolverine. And Bob Harris called me up and said, it's an interesting idea, but I don't think we want to say that Wolverine could live that long. And I went, okay, all right, fair enough. That's good. And then I created Talon, who was basically he was Steve Englehart's Beast from the Avengers. He was the party guy. He was the guy, who drank a beer in the back room, and who you couldn't trust because he was completely undependable, and he was just fun. He was the exact opposite of Wolverine. So those are the only 2 times that I was told no. Otherwise, they let me go because it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So I had no wrath against Marvel at all.
Yeah, and I didn't think that was the case in that sense, as in, hating Marvel or anything like that. It was more in the lines of just unhappy with how things are going and things like that.
I wasn't unhappy at all. To me, it was like this just looked like a sure bet. Having come from independent and small press comics and stuff like that, I was sort of going back home, in a lot of ways. So for me, it made perfect sense. Sure.
Yeah, and you were the guy that has, again, you had the upbringing of the indie world of being a writer. So I think I think for you particular it was more safer, to be in that kind of environment than everyone else, as far as knowing what to do and how to do it. Because one thing I do want to talk about is the delays a little bit. Not too much. I don't want to go too much on it, but one of the big issues that Image had, as great as it was, because it was a big thing, was delays. And I wanted to ask you this question. I know you weren't heavily involved in it, but are we ever going to see Darker Image 2?
No.
And again, that's one of those jokes that I always ask.
Nor are you ever going to see the 1963 annual or a continuation of Image United. So get those all out of your mind. Here's the way it worked. There were 6 of us. 3 guys did group books, had huge posses, people working, for them in their studios and blah, blah, blah. They were always late. 3 guys did a single character, did not have a whole posse behind them, people in their studio, and were pretty much on time all the time. But we got stuck again, when you're in a group, if somebody misbehaves, the whole entire group gets painted with that brush, even if they don't deserve it. And I think for some reason, I just talked to a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking over something, and I said, I don't understand why Image has been put up to a completely different standard than every other publisher. We have been criticized for stuff that no other publisher has ever been criticized for, and it's going on 30 years now. And we've learned how to deal with it, of course, but I still don't understand why we get this when no other publisher does, when our deal is the single most generous deal ever in publishing.
Yeah. So let's talk about one of your characters that you mentioned before, And this one right here, Shadowhawk, right? Great character, great storytelling. Um, Being a kid from the Bronx myself, he's very urban.
Mhm.
Um, but talk to me a little bit about the concept behind and the idea behind Shadowhawk and how it came about to you.
Well, like normal man, a couple different ways. When I started thinking about Shadowhawk, thinking about the character, what I actually thought about is Batman and the Joker, and how Batman fails every single time because he lets the Joker go free instead of killing him. And a lot of superhero fans have a problem with superheroes killing. But what they don't seem to get is every hero kills except superheroes. And the reason superheroes don't kill isn't because of a moral imperative. They don't kill because the Joker's a popular character, and every time he comes back, sales shoot up. That's why they don't kill. So by letting the Joker go over and over and over again to kill over and over again, Joker's a homicidal maniac. The difference between a hero killing and a villain killing is a villain kills innocents. A hero does not. A hero kills villains to protect innocents. So I didn't want to go all the way to killing with Shadowhawk because of people's disdain of it, which again I find ridiculous personally. So I had him maim people, break their backs. So there is no way a villain like the Joker, for instance, could continue to murder people if he met Shadowhawk. And that's really was the impetus behind the character.
And then, as well, you also add the story of HIV, how he
Mhm.
gets injected and then HIV, and he actually does die, and he doesn't die in a war. He dies because of the HIV disease that's in him. So talk to me a little bit more about that and how that came about as well.
Well, I was trying to find a justification for him. Why would you do this? You know, he's not a multi-billionaire, so he doesn't have all the toys and tricks that Batman has, right? So with Batman, again, you're looking at a character that obviously is psychologically wrong. He's just there's something is not connected right in his head, which always makes me wonder why Batman fans are so insistent that he has no superpowers. Hell, him not tripping over his cape is a superpower. But I forgot my train of thought. Sorry.
It's okay.
When you get to be triple digits, you'll forget stuff too.
Oh man, I'm starting to forget things all the time now too. So I know.
So anyway, yeah, whatever.
So, but then a few years later, you end up doing A Touch of Silver, which is a semi-autobiography. As and at the same time, we have a little bit The Pact. So two different books altogether. But I wanna hear a little bit more about A Touch of Silver and why you decided to write this story in particular.
Well, it's very autobiographical. I was going through a divorce at that time, and I was reaching back to my parents' divorce, to my time as a 10-year-old. So where my escape was the comics that I read and drawing and that kind of stuff. The person sitting there on the bed with the comic books sprayed out and drawing is JM, my child, my baby. And that's who I modeled Timothy after. So the notion was, to try and better understand what I was going through in my personal life. I would do this bit of reaching back to the time I was a kid. And that's basically what it was about. The Pact was just, let's do a Teen Titans. There were
really does look like that.
there were a couple of at this point, Eddie is Shadowhawk, so he's a kid. Invincible, Zephyr from Noble Causes, and Fire Breather. And I just thought, so I called up everybody and said, okay, let's do a book where they're a group called the Pact, except let's do it differently. Each one of us does an issue of the book. No continuity, no anything. You just do whatever story you want, but have these 4 characters star in it. So I did the first one. I think Jay Farber may have done the second one. Yeah, because this is the second one. And then Andy and Phil did the third one with Fire Breather. And Robert came up at the end with, I forget who drew it. So it was a kind of a unique concept in the sense that not only do we have 4 characters, but we have 4 different creators over 4 different issues, which I don't think anyone's ever done before.
Yeah, I love the fact that you guys took the liberties to do things like that you normally wouldn't see. So when I saw the Pact, I was like, oh, this is cool. And I don't have the book. I don't own the book. I'll be honest. It was a time. It was during the time that I kind of stopped collecting books for a while because once I was running out of space. I live in an apartment, so one, I was running out of space, and 2, when you get, it wasn't a situation of age as much of it as it was that I just couldn't justify spending the amount of money I had to spend in comics.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's expensive. It could be expensive, especially if you want to be consistent with certain books. It wasn't until I started the channels when I started collecting books again. So I'm actually buying books again as a result of the shop. And I'm enjoying it. I'm loving it. But I'm not buying the same amount that I used to buy, right? At this point, I'll buy like 2 or 3 books and at the most. So
everyone goes that phase where you just stop and then you have to catch up.
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest. One of the things I have problematic with the top books, in particular, is the fact that even though they try their best to make it easy to jump in, there's still history that's in the back. There's a lot of baggage in the back that you just don't know is going on. And I remember, Spider-Man's one of my favorite books. Spider-Man's one of my favorite characters. I go in and I hear that Aunt May is going to get remarried, that Jonah Jameson's the mayor. I was like, where did all this happen? And growing up as a kid, we didn't have that, and I'm sure you could relate to that. The story, it was stuck in time for a very long time, and now it feels like they can't seem to stay in that time. Like everything happened within a 5-year period, but that 5-year period for us is 20 years, right? But it feels like they have to go, the comics have to be in real time. It feels like, when it's like, that's not how it was. How it was that they never really shared with you what year it was and things like that. It just was the story, and it was the right story for the right time, or the wrong story, depending on some of the stories that we got. But you didn't have a problem with Peter Parker being in college for 10 years because you looked at it from, it's not 10 years in his world, it's within the time he's in college. So that's what makes comics hard for me these days. However, I still try my best to try to, do my best to read what's out there and just pretty much throw away what I remember from continuity's sake. I think that's the easiest way to do it, personally speaking. All right, let's talk about the timeline. Because I got this book. I asked my dealer to hear me saying, I said my dealer. I asked him if he could get me this book because he didn't have it. So I picked it up. As you can see here, I got all these tabs because these are all the things I wanted to talk to you. And I did talk to you about most of it already, so I didn't have to look through it. But when I was... what I was when I was reading this book, I was just amazed at how much stuff you had. So were you, you're obviously a historian in this case, but how were you able to like get all this information all and do all this research? Obviously, it wasn't third party knowledge; it's firsthand knowledge of things that were going on. So were you at that particular time when you started the timeline, not officially, but when you started, when was it when you were starting to actually take note of all the events that were going on?
Well, um, I saved an awful lot of stuff, magazines, interviews, things like that. Um, things from the day. I took contemporaneous notes during our meetings. So I pulled out all the information that I had and, did research on stuff that I didn't have and set some goals for myself. One of the things was that the timeline concentrates on things that I thought were historically important, not on bestsellers or anything like that. So that would include a book that either became a movie or a TV show, a name creator coming and doing a book for the first time, award-winning books, things like that, books that broke new ground, books that did things that no other company had done before, those kind of things. I guess hallmarks or earmarks, whatever you want to call it. Um, and I just had a lot of the information on hand. I just had to pull it all out and go through it. One of the things about that cover is I saw some guy online complaining that the books were all done in no particular order, and this guy wanted them done in chronological order. Well, they're done in chronological order on the interior, but if you look at the cover, and I pointed this out to him, because I placed things carefully and moved stuff around. I moved a lot of those books around in different places and replaced books that I had. I tried to do each book by a different creator. So no creator had two books on the cover.
Mhm.
I tried. There was a couple times I didn't make it. But also, if you look just to the just to my left of the pit, which is up there, the word the,
Yeah.
um, right? So it starts, that's Youngblood number 1,
Hmm.
right? Then you go down diagonally, Spawn number 1,
Oh, I see it.
Dragon number 1, Shadowhawk, and then it crosses over to um, Cyberforce. And then you go up, Wet Works number 1, Walking Dead number 1, Nowhere number 1, Invincible number 1. So it goes down and then back up again. There is an order, and those all came, that's all chronological.
Mm.
Uh,
Nice little Easter egg you throw in there.
yeah, a little Easter egg. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but there you go. It's a little Easter egg.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Easter eggs, especially in comic books. I love seeing them. Especially, one of them in particular was Todd McFarlane's Felix the Cat. I always love finding Felix. It was always fun doing those things. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I probably wouldn't have catched it. I would have probably caught it after 20 times watching it, or looking it through.
Yeah.
Um, because after once again, now you can't not see it, right? You're like, oh, there it is. Um, but there's so many titles, man. Just looking at the history, it's 30 years of history, and the amount of books that are here, and really top selling books too. It's not like it's just Youngblood, Spawn, Shadowhawk, and Wildcats and Savage Dragon were the best books. You got Walking Dead, you got Happy. You guys ended up getting Gru and Madge there for a while. Saga, which all these books that are all part of World Image in particular, and they are all unique. which is make great, which is so great. I'm a huge fan of a lot of the work. I actually started reading Saga. I got into the bandwagon way too late on it, but I started reading it. It's a fun read. I picked up Radiant Red for the first time this week, so I'm excited about reading that. Um, and it's just great seeing the amount of work that took to get from where you guys started to where it is today. Now, when we think of Image, obviously what comes to mind are the original cast, right, as we'll call it here. But it has grown to be such a great publisher. Um, Again, the opportunity to do things differently, not to be stuck in continuity sake, and yeah, there are characters in Image that are iconic, and Shadowhawk just happens to be one of them. Um, yeah, I believe Shadowhawk is such a great character. First of all, one of the best costumes from all of the characters. Um, so I will say that much. I fell in love with Shadowhawk, the way he looked. Um, just the fact that it was simple, but yet it was it had, it was stylish enough, and it had all the 90s flair that comes along with it, of course, because it was the 90s, but it was still simple. It was great. I do see the Hawkman, Hawk Girl look into it, and again, the comparisons of Wolverine, of course, were there, but
Yeah.
besides that, it was still a great story. It was good. It was urban story. So it hit a chord in that sense. Now we're talking about Shadow Line, and the stuff you're working with in the Shadow Line part. I know you have a couple of books that you worked on, and we've got one more book that I'm going to show you. I got one more slide after this one that we'll talk about. But talk to me a little bit about the Shadow Line side of Image and what you got going on there.
Well, one of the things we decided in our first meeting was the two things we decided was, number one, Image would never own anything except the Image Comics logo and name. That's it. No IPs, no anything like that. And for 30 years, that's been the case. Image does not own anything. The second thing was that we were all free to start our own companies and do our own things without prejudice from the other partners. So what that means is Eric Larson may not like what the books that I publish, but he can't say anything. He can't say you can't publish that. The same thing. I can't say that to Mark Silvestri or any of us. What happens as a result is that because we have autonomous companies, we don't share money either. And as you go through life, the one thing that you know is that the thing that starts most fights and most arguments is money.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't share money, we have less to argue about. Now, the Image partners are all very, very strong individuals. Okay, they're very strong personalities amongst us. So we each moved into different spheres of our own. Shadowline is mine. My notion with Shadowline is I want to publish as wide a range of material as humanly possible. I'm not a fan of horror, but I've published quite a few horror books. So the tagline there, where diversity thrives, what I mean by diversity is different types of books. It's not a superhero company. It's not a horror company. It's not a this. It's not a that. It's hopefully books that are good. What I look for are books, an interesting concept, and books that are well executed, writing and drawing. And I've had a couple misses here and there, but by and large, I've been pretty proud of what we've published.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about some of those books? Because I did see a few of them and intrigued by some of them in particular. One in particular I was thinking about was Hell Cop. Um, you know,
Alcott's great. The idea behind, and that's ongoing right now. As a matter of fact, I just turned in a solicitation for issue number 9 just this morning. The notion behind Hell Cop is that extra dimensions were discovered. It was discovered that, yeah, there really are other dimensions. And they came across one of these dimensions that was filled with demons and brimstone and all the things that we think of as hell, right? So hell is its own dimension. And so the Hell Cops were created to keep them there, to make sure that demons didn't come here and ruin our stuff. And that's the concept. I'm like, well, that's clever. That's different. That's interesting. Let's do that. That's fun. And, it's been great so far. I mean, like I said, I just turned in a solicitation for issue number 9 this morning. And, it's a lot of fun. They did a Hellboy spoof cover, which is just wonderful. They even did the logo, like Hellboy.
Did you get from Manolian? McNolan? Again, another name I can't get. Did he ever give you like a thumbs up or anything like that for it?
Not that I'm aware of. Well, this is brand new. I mean, this
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
Public yet. I mean, I just literally did it this morning.
Spoiler alert.
And, he hasn't seen it. He won't see it for months down the road.
Yeah.
At any rate, the point is, to me, is to do interesting books with interesting themes and have them be well done. Good writing, good artwork. And that's what I look for. I don't look at genres. I don't look at what's popular or anything like that, or what I think is going to sell. I've done books that I know aren't going to sell, but I don't care. They're good books and they're worth being published. And I'll take the hit.
Yeah. All right. One last thing. Shadowhawk's returning, and it's called The Last Shadowhawk. Talk to me a little bit about the return. And I love the fact that you use the Youngblood cover.
Well, this is just one of the covers.
This is one of the covers. Yeah.
Yeah, going to be a bunch of them. The Last Shadowhawk. It will be the very last Shadowhawk story. It was because it's the 30th anniversary of Shadowhawk in August. Philip Tan is a big Shadowhawk fan, and he's been wanting to do Shadowhawk forever. And about once a year or so, I get a, hey, if you're going to do Shadowhawk, think about me. And he's a wonderful guy and great artist.
Oh yeah, I love his work.
Yeah. So, and yeah, just the sweetest guy you can possibly meet. He would be a good guy to interview. Anyway,
put in the good word for me then.
So I said, okay, Philip, you know what? The 30th anniversary is coming up. What do you got? Tell me the story that you wanted to tell. So he told me. And I said, okay, let's go with that. So it originally was going to be called Who is Shadowhawk? But the story didn't quite match that title. So I changed it to The Last Shadowhawk. Now, this is one of the covers. This is obviously based on Youngblood #1. And I penciled it, which I'm really rusty. I haven't drawn anything in forever. And Philip inked it. And Brian Haberlin did the coloring on it, which just knocked it straight out of the park. There's another cover. We're going to do the original Shadowhawk cover with just the helmet that Rob inked, and Eric Stevenson is going to be coloring it. We're going to do one that's based on Spider-Man #1, Todd's Spider-Man #1, that Chance Wolfe is inking, and Jimmy Robinson is going to color it. Philip is doing a cover. There's a cover of all the covers, all of them that I could fit on a double-page spread, kind of like the cover for the timeline. There's a couple of blank covers, and that's all we have so far.
I'll be looking out for it. It's supposed to come out in August, right?
August, yeah, because that is Shadowhawk's 30th anniversary. So also there will be a 3D version with this cover. So the cover will be in 3D and the whole entire book will be in 3D.
Oh, cool.
Just because 3D.
Yeah. Do you need the glass? It's 3D glasses, the same style, or is it like RV?
Yeah, glasses will be included. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, it's been a pleasure, an honor, and it's been great talking with you. I learned a lot. I will say I did learn a lot about the history of Image. One, by reading the timeline, things I knew already, but things I didn't know, and things that you clarified for me as well, which was really good to hear. It was a blast having you. I would love to talk to you again, especially when the book starts coming out. I'll love to hear a little bit more about what's going on with the world of The Last Shadowhawk. So I'll try to reach out again sometime then, so we could talk a little bit about it. And again, it was great having you in the show. With that said, man, is there anything else you like to share with the audience before we end this broadcast?
No, just everyone stay safe.
Yes. Thank you so much, guys. Let me put you in the waiting room here. We'll talk in a second.
Okay.
So there you have it. That was our interview my interview with Jim Valentino, co-founder of Image Comics. Again, guys, it was great having him. But this Monday, we're going to talk to Sean Hill. So you got to see that one. Again, if you haven't seen the videos on Batman, the Batman videos, they are there. What my favorite Batman movies are of all time. And there are some animated features there. It was great. If you need to get some comic books, Squiggy's Dugout's the place to go if you're in New Rochelle. Go to your comic book shops. Buy comic books. That's the best thing to do. Keep the business alive and well, because it is always great to hold a comic book in your hand. With that said, guys, it's been fun. I will be seeing you next time on the IzzyVerse. Take care, everybody. Bye.